In the spring of 1999, the community of Littleton, Colorado, was the picture of suburban tranquility. It was a quiet, largely middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Denver, the kind of place where violent crime rarely crossed anyone's mind. That quiet baseline shattered on the morning of April 20th. Columbine High School became the site of a massacre that left 13 innocent people dead and paralyzed the nation. As SWAT teams swarmed the building and parents frantically searched for their children, an urgent question emerged through the chaos. Everyone needed to understand the motive behind two seniors turning weapons on their own classmates. The public desperately needed an answer to feel safe again. Almost immediately, society latched onto an explanation that was easy to digest, but dangerously inaccurate. The prevailing story painted the two shooters as relentless victims of high school bullies. According to this narrative, years of torment from athletes and popular students finally pushed two teenage outcasts past their breaking point, causing them to spontaneously seek revenge. The evidence gathered in the aftermath tells a completely different story. The attack on Columbine was a highly calculated operation, extensively documented and planned for well over a year before the first shot was fired. Looking at this cafeteria schematic reveals the true objective. Two large propane explosives were planted next to structural pillars, intending to bring the ceiling down. Timers were set for 11:17 a.m., peak lunch hour, with the explicit goal of murdering an estimated 450 students. A plot relying on mass, indiscriminate destruction points away from a reactive strike against specific bullies. To understand a massacre, we have to examine the individual who designed it, 18-year-old Eric Harris. Eric Harris was a bright student enrolled in advanced classes, the son of a decorated military test pilot. He lived in a comfortable neighborhood, far removed from inner-city violence or gang activity. While he experienced friction and teasing at school, his internal reaction to it was highly abnormal. Instead of venting frustration, his resentment expanded. He began to direct a virulent hatred towards specific students, the teaching staff, the entire institution, and eventually the general population. Psychologists classify this behavior as an injustice collector. An injustice collector is someone who obsessively catalogs every slight, completely lacking the emotional capacity to forgive or let go of perceived wrongs. His journals revealed a mind fixated on trivial annoyances. He documented his absolute contempt for people driving slowly in the fast lane, individuals mispronouncing everyday words, or a friend who overslept and missed a carpool. Harris used this catalog of petty insults to build a steady supply of rage, creating a psychological justification for his plan to punish society at large. The secondary shooter, Dylan Klebold, presented a stark psychological contrast. His own private writings detailed deep depressive episodes, suicidal ideation, and a pervasive lack of self-esteem, making him highly susceptible to a stronger personality. Where Klebold sought validation, Harris displayed classic signs of psychopathy. He possessed a profound lack of empathy, exhibiting no internal conscience, what psychologists call the superego, to regulate his cruelty toward others. This deficit was masked by severe manipulation. When caught breaking rules, Harris could look parents and law enforcement directly in the eyes, deliver a convincing apology, and perfectly perform the role of a rehabilitated, remorseful teenager. He maintained this harmless facade while simultaneously building lethal explosives in his bedroom and actively updating online death threats targeting former friends. This dynamic created a lethal dyad. Harris's psychopathic drive found a perfect instrument in Klebold's deep depression, allowing the primary architect to orchestrate a sophisticated mass casualty plot right under the noses of authority. On the morning of April 20th, the primary explosive devices in the cafeteria failed to detonate. Deprived of their massive structural collapse, the two attackers resorted to firearms, turning the school's corridors and library into an active combat zone. Their actions in the library showcased a predatory sadism. They systematically worked their way around the room, firing at students hiding beneath the desks. Survivors reported the shooters hooting, using racial slurs, and saying peekaboo before pulling the trigger, treating the slaughter of their peers like a morbid game. After leaving 10 dead in the library and exchanging fire with police outside, they realized escape was impossible. Rather than face a courtroom and lose their power, they took their own lives, ensuring they retained absolute control over how their story ended. The joy they took in the slaughter reveals that the attack was not a reactive snap caused by bullying, but a premeditated mission of psychopathic domination. The massacre at Columbine originated from a severe, manipulative psychopathic disorder finding an accessible target in the high school ecosystem. Moving forward, our approach to threat assessment requires precision. We have to draw a hard line between a hurting teenager who needs compassionate intervention and an injustice-collecting individual carefully plotting lethal harm. Placing the blame for extreme violence solely on schoolyard bullying gives society a comfortable, identifiable villain, but it obscures the actual clinical red flags hiding in plain sight. Recognizing the specific mechanisms of a dangerous mind, the lack of empathy, the manipulation, the obsessive grievance tracking, is our strongest defense against violent fantasies becoming devastating realities. In 1999, 15-year-old Sean Graves was confined to a hospital bed, waiting for news that would determine the rest of his life. The doctors were blunt. The damage to his spine was catastrophic, and their official assessment was that he was paralyzed from the waist down. He would never walk again. Sean's immediate response wasn't despair. It was a total rejection of the doctor's prognosis. He felt a surge of defiance that simply refused to accept a life in a wheelchair. From that bed, he set a goal that his medical team considered impossible. He wasn't just going to finish school, he was going to walk across the stage at his high school graduation. He viewed his recovery as a battle for his own autonomy. He decided that if he stayed in that chair, he was letting the two shooters win, and he wasn't going to let them dictate a single day of his future. This shift in perspective transformed his rehabilitation. It wasn't just medical treatment anymore. Every painful stretch was a deliberate strike against the tragedy that had landed him there. On the morning of April 20th, Columbine High School felt like any other suburban campus. Hundreds of students were gathered outside, talking about their plans and waiting for the morning bell. Sean and two friends, Dean and Lance, decided to change their routine that day. Instead of heading to lunch inside, they stepped out the side doors to grab a soda from the vending machines. Looking up at the top of the dirt hill, they saw two students dressed in black trench coats. They were carrying heavy duffel bags and loading weapons that the boys initially assumed were toys for a senior prank. The assumption vanished instantly when the two figures turned toward them and opened fire, raining live rounds down on the defenseless group. The transition from a mundane lunch break to a deadly ambush happened so quickly that Sean and his friends had no time to react before the first bullets hit. Sean dived for cover behind a concrete wall, shielding his body except for his backpack. A single round entered the bag. The bullet ricocheted inside, redirecting into his back and exiting through his right hip. The impact instantly severed the connection to his legs. He was paralyzed from the waist down before he even hit the ground. Sean lay in the doorway of the cafeteria, looking back at his legs and realizing they were completely unresponsive. For months, Sean had been haunted by a recurring nightmare of being paralyzed. As he lay bleeding in the school doorway, he realized that specific, terrifying dream had just become his reality. Sean lay helpless as the sounds of explosions and gunfire moved closer to the cafeteria stairs. He was trapped in the path of the shooter's descent. Just 5 feet from where he lay, a propane canister bomb was sitting in the cafeteria. The shooters were actively firing at it, trying to detonate the massive explosive, while Sean was right next to it. He eventually passed out from the trauma, waking up only when an ambulance drove directly into the parking lot, positioning itself between Sean and the building. 2 paramedics leaped out, grabbed Sean by his shirt and his belt, and dragged his limp body across the concrete. As they pulled him into the ambulance, they could hear the metal tinging of bullets hitting the roof of the vehicle. Sean had survived the initial bullet, but he was still trapped in a kill zone. Without the paramedics' decision to enter the line of fire, he wouldn't have made it off that sidewalk alive. The final toll of the massacre was 13 people murdered, and a community permanently changed. The shooters were found dead by suicide in the library. For Sean, the end of the shooting was the beginning of a years-long effort to reclaim the life the doctors said was over. He spent months in grueling physical therapy, enduring thousands of hours of work to force a connection back to his legs. The anger he felt toward the shooters became his primary motivator. Every time he felt like quitting, he reminded himself that his recovery was the only way to prove they hadn't ruined him. On his graduation day, Sean Graves achieved exactly what he promised. He stood up from his wheelchair and walked across the stage to receive his diploma. Sean refused to let the events of 1999 define his ceiling. He spent the next 2 decades proving his doctors wrong. And today, he's still walking. In 1999, Littleton, Colorado was a quiet, middle-class suburban area, an unremarkable community of booming new housing and quiet streets. That ordinary setting was shattered on April 20th. At 11:19 a.m., 2 students in black trench coats opened fire outside the cafeteria, sending hundreds of children running for their lives as 911 dispatchers struggled to track reports of bombs and snipers. News networks broadcast the chaos, fueling an early narrative that the 2 shooters were identical outcasts seeking revenge for school bullying. Experts who later analyzed the shooters' records found that neither boy had simply snapped, nor were they driven by the same internal forces. They functioned as a dyad, a rare, highly dangerous psychological pairing where 2 distinct personalities lock together to form a lethal partnership. Understanding Columbine requires looking past the image of a single, unified entity to examine the radically different pathologies each boy brought to the school. 18-year-old Eric Harris came from a stable, military background. He was an intelligent student in advanced classes who presented himself as a capable young man with dreams of joining the Marines. His internal reality was defined by extreme rage and a total lack of empathy. When a friend cracked his car windshield with a snowball, Harris became frantic and aggressive. Yet when confronted by authorities for other misbehaviors, he displayed a psychopathic ability to look adults in the eye and say exactly what they wanted to hear. Dylan Klebold was 17 and grew up in a pacifist, intellectual household. To those around him, he was a gentle family friend and a quiet student just weeks away from graduation. Klebold's private journals, stretching back 2 years, revealed a classic adolescent depressive. He suffered from severe suicidal ideation and a cripplingly low self-esteem, fueled by a desperate need for external validation. While Harris's outward oppression and Klebold's inward despair are concerning, neither profile on its own is inherently linked to committing mass violence. The danger lies in how these traits interlock. In historical violent dyads, like the pairing of Leopold and Loeb, a dominant, sociopathic personality weaponizes a submissive partner. Harris and Klebold fit this pattern. Harris provided dominant rage, while Klebold sought validation by following his lead. This feedback loop normalized their escalation. Over a year, fantasies transitioned into death threats, pipe bombs, and mock attack videos. This escalation culminated in a calculated plan to detonate propane bombs in the cafeteria during the busiest lunch hour, targeting over 400 of their classmates at once. The massacre was the direct product of their unchecked psychological chemistry and over a year of premeditated planning. When the cafeteria bombs failed to detonate, the shooters pivoted. They moved to the library and began a terrifying shooting spree, cornering dozens of students and staff. They treated the attack like a game, mocking their classmates and shouting racial slurs before opening fire. The massacre ended at 12:08 p.m., when both shooters took their own lives, leaving 13 innocent victims dead and a community in shock. For the families, the trauma was compounded by the agonizing wait for evacuation buses that never arrived. In the years following, survivors like Sean Graves, who was paralyzed in the attack, demonstrated incredible resilience, refusing to let the shooter's actions define the rest of their lives. Focusing on bullying or teenage angst overlooks the specific psychological mechanics that drove the attack. Preventing future tragedies requires looking beyond the behavior of isolated individuals to identify the dangerous, interlocking connections that can turn toxic ideation into lethal action.